Hey everybody, my name is Sarah. I'm the director here at the Atlanta School of Photography, and today I'm going to be explaining one of the biggest questions that we get here at the school, which is what is the difference between a full frame and a crop frame sensor? So the first thing to know is that when you have the light that's coming in through your lens into your camera, it is actually in the shape of a circle. Yeah, the lens is circular, so the image that it projects on the other end is circular as well. So inside of the camera itself is the sensor, made up of millions of tiny little pixels to make up our image. The difference between crop frame and full frame sensors is how big that sensor is and how big of a chunk of that projection it's actually picking up and recording. So if you can imagine that this is the projection that's coming through the lens onto the back of the camera, and if we were to put a full frame sensor in front of it, it would be about that much of your picture, be about that size. So this much, this is the final image that you're recording because this is the size of the sensor. Now, with the crop frame sensor, instead, it's a smaller sensor, so instead we're picking up this much. Another way to visualize it is, if this is your projection, your sensor on a full frame camera is about that big. So this is your final image. If you're using a crop frame sensor, your final image is here. So here's where it gets complicated, crop factors. A Canon cropped frame camera has a crop factor of 1.6. Nikons have a crop factor of 1.5. So say you take a 50mm lens and you put it onto a Nikon that has a crop sensor. That 50mm lens on a crop sensor looks as if you took a full frame camera and zoomed in to 75mm. So this is why sometimes you'll see at the bottom, like a description of a photograph, it'll say 50mm lens, 75mm crop frame equivalent. So you have a lens that on a crop frame sensor would look like 75mm on a full frame sensor. The problem with this is that most photographers now are starting with a crop frame sensor. So there's no reference point for what a true 50mm would look like or a true 75mm would look like on a full frame camera. So when you bring the camera up to your eye with a 50mm and a crop frame sensor, in your mind, if you've only ever used crop frame cameras, you think that that's 50mm. I started on a crop frame sensor. My first camera was, I think, the first Canon Rebel that ever came out. And when I put my 50mm on, I thought that was what 50mm looked like. And then I got my hands on a Canon 5D Mark II, a full frame camera. And I took that 50mm lens and put it on that camera, on my full frame camera, and instantly my field of view opened up. I had a much wider area of view on the same lens. So I started to retrain my brain into what 50mm actually looked like on my new camera. So that's where some of the confusion comes in with a lot of the students that we have here, which is completely understandable, especially when you have a series of numbers and phrases that you have never heard before, and a lot of it ends up sounding like Greek. So the advice that I give to my students is don't worry about it. I know that seems weird, but if you are only using crop frame cameras and you know what certain focal lengths look like to you through your camera, then that's the most important piece of information that you can have as a photographer. As long as you know what the differences are between crop frame and full frame and have that little tidbit of knowledge in your pocket, that's basically all it comes down to. Or until you go out and get a full frame camera and know that ahead of time your lens collection will look significantly different on your full frame camera. You'll have a little bit more space and you'll feel yourself, at least what I did when I first got my full frame camera, constantly walking closer. So I hope that helped to clarify and some of the confusion between a crop frame and a full frame sensor. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in class.